Welcome to a crucial chapter in history, the Nuremberg Trials. After the chaos of World War II, the world was left with the daunting task of delivering justice to the perpetrators of atrocities. In Nuremberg, Germany, the final judgment came for many Nazi war criminals. This momentous event marked not only the end of a dark era, but also a step forward for the international justice system. The world watched as the once mighty figures of the Nazi regime faced accountability for their heinous crimes. The Nuremberg Trials began in November 1945. The Allies sought justice for the horrors of the Holocaust and other war crimes. 12 high-ranking Nazi leaders were sentenced to death by hanging. These trials were not just about individual punishment. They were a statement that no one, regardless of rank or status, would escape justice. The Nuremberg Trials set a precedent for how the world would deal with future war crimes.
Among the accused were some of the most notorious figures of the Nazi regime, including Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, and Joachim von Ribbentrop. These men had once wielded immense power, but now they stood trial for their roles in the genocide of millions. Göring, who had served as Hitler's second-in-command, faced charges for crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the plundering of Europe.
For those convicted, the sentences were severe. The death penalty by hanging was a grim but necessary conclusion to the trials. The Nuremberg executions sent a clear message to the world that the horrors of the Nazi regime would not be tolerated. Among the 12 executed, Göring would eventually evade justice by committing suicide hours before his scheduled hanging.
The executions were carried out on the 16th of October, 1946, in a quiet, somber atmosphere. At 1 a.m., the accused were hanged, their final moments captured in chilling photographs. These men, who had once led armies and governed nations, now faced the ultimate consequence for their actions. Their deaths marked a symbolic end to the Nazi regime's reign of terror.
Despite their historical importance, the Nuremberg trials were not without controversy. Some criticized the trials as victor's justice, arguing that the Allies were judging the Nazis under laws they had not followed during the war. Others questioned whether the death penalty was a fair punishment for those who may have been merely following orders.
The Nuremberg Trials set a powerful precedent for future war crimes trials. They marked the first time that individuals were held accountable for crimes against humanity, establishing the principle that no one was above the law. This idea laid the groundwork for future tribunals, such as the International Criminal Court, and helped to shape the post-World War II justice system.
One of the most infamous men sentenced to death in Nuremberg was Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler's foreign minister. He had been instrumental in forging alliances with fascist Italy and Japan, and in the brutal suppression of resistance movements across Europe. His hanging was the end of a career that had seen him rise to power through ruthless diplomacy and betrayal.
Rudolf Hess, Hitler's former deputy Führer, found himself in a unique position. In 1941, he had flown to Scotland in a failed attempt to negotiate peace with the British, leading to his capture. At the Nuremberg Trials, Hess was sentenced to life imprisonment, not execution. His actions had been considered a betrayal of the Nazi cause, and his sentence reflected the complexity of his role in the war. Hess's fate, unlike the others, would be marked by years of imprisonment rather than the gallows. Wilhelm Keitel, the chief of the Nazi High Command, had been one of Hitler's most loyal officers. He signed numerous orders that led to the execution of civilians and prisoners of war. At the Nuremberg Trials, Keitel was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. His role in the atrocities committed during the war was undeniable. His execution was a grim reminder of the cost of unquestioning loyalty to a tyrant. The Nuremberg Trials were not solely conducted by the United States. The Allied powers, the UK, France, the Soviet Union, and the US played an integral role in the trials, ensuring that Nazi leaders were held accountable. While each nation had its own approach to justice, the trials highlighted a shared commitment to ensuring that the horrors of the Nazi regime were exposed and punished. The unity of the Allies in Nuremberg demonstrated the global resolve to end tyranny and injustice. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, was one of the few Nazi leaders to express remorse for his actions. He admitted his role in the war,
but distanced himself from Hitler's more extreme policies. Despite his remorse, Speer was sentenced to 20 years in prison. His trial raised difficult questions about accountability and the nature of complicity. Speer's later writings on the trials and his reflections on his role in the Nazi state have made him one of the more complex figures in Nuremberg's legacy. The Nuremberg Trials not only impacted the Nazi leaders, but also the German population at large. The trials revealed the full extent of the atrocities committed in the name of the Third Reich, forcing many Germans to confront the brutal realities of their nation's role in the war. For some, it was a moment of reckoning. For others, it was a painful reminder of their complicity. The Nuremberg trials laid bare the horrors of the Holocaust and the devastating consequences of Nazi ideology. The Nuremberg trials were not merely about punishing individuals. They were about setting a precedent for international law. For the first time, crimes against humanity and war crimes were recognized as legal offenses, punishable under law. The legacy of Nuremberg has endured, inspiring subsequent trials and the creation of global institutions like the International Criminal Court, designed to ensure that such atrocities would never be repeated. The final moments of the Nuremberg executions were both somber and symbolic. As the Nazi leaders stood at the gallows, their fate was sealed. They had risen to power through violence and terror, and now they faced justice. These executions served as a powerful reminder that no one, not even the most powerful men in Nazi Germany, would escape accountability. The Nuremberg trials concluded the Nazi era, but their lessons would resonate for generations to come. The Nuremberg executions were closely watched around the world. Newsreels and newspaper reports spread the images and stories of the convicted Nazi leaders facing justice. For many nations, the trials were a vindication of the Allies' efforts to end tyranny and punish war crimes. The executions reinforced the idea that crimes against humanity could not be hidden and that justice was a global concern, transcending borders and politics. Even decades later, the Nuremberg executions sparked debate. Some historians argued that the trials blurred the line between justice and revenge. Were all the convicted fully responsible? or were some merely following orders? Yet the consensus remains that the executions, though grim, were necessary to uphold the principles of justice. The moral weight of these decisions continues to challenge students of history and law. The executions at Nuremberg were more than punishment. They were a lesson for humanity. They reminded the world that atrocities, mass murders, and systematic oppression would not go unpunished. By facing their crimes, the Nazi leaders became a symbol of accountability. The Nuremberg final judgment established that justice could be pursued even after unimaginable destruction, a lesson still relevant in today's world.
While the executions concluded the trials, they also reinforced the memory of the victims of the Holocaust and Nazi terror. Millions had perished, and the world needed to remember their suffering. Memorials, museums, and educational programs today trace their origins back to Nuremberg, where the horrors of genocide were laid bare. The executions and the trials themselves ensured that history would not forget.
The Nuremberg executions marked the end of the Nazi era, but the lessons of justice continue to resonate. They reminded the world that accountability cannot be ignored, and that international law has the power to confront even the greatest crimes. Today, students of history, law, and human rights reflect on Nuremberg as a turning point, a moment when humanity collectively declared that evil must be answered, and that justice, even in the darkest times, could prevail. Thank you for joining this journey into the Nuremberg Trials and the executions of Nazi war criminals.